I never thought money could actually change someone's DNA, you know? Like, I always heard people say money changes people, but I thought it was just something bitter folks said when they didn't have any. Then my best friend Marcus inherited $47 million, and I watched him transform into someone I didn't recognize. But that's not even the crazy part. The crazy part is what I found out about where that money actually came from. Marcus and I grew up together in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We're talking matching Power Rangers lunchboxes in 2nd grade, sleeping over at each other's houses every weekend, learning to drive in his mom's beat-up Honda Civic, the whole 9 yards. We were brothers in every way except blood. His family didn't have much. His mom worked doubles at the hospital as a nurse, his dad left when Marcus was 6, and they lived in a small 2-bedroom apartment in Lawrenceville. My family wasn't rich either, but we had a house, and my dad had a steady job as an electrician. Through high school and college, we stayed tight. We both ended up at Penn State, me studying business, him studying computer science. After graduation, we moved back to Pittsburgh, got an apartment together in Shadyside, and started our careers. I went into marketing at a mid-size firm, and Marcus got a job as a software developer at a local tech company. We were living the dream, honestly, splitting rent, having people over on weekends, hitting up the bars on Carson Street, going to Steelers games when we could afford tickets. Life was simple. Life was good. Then, about 2 years ago, Marcus got a call that changed everything. It was from a lawyer in Philadelphia. Apparently, Marcus had a great uncle he'd never met, his dad's uncle, who had passed away at 93. This great uncle, Theodore Hammond, had been estranged from the family for decades. Marcus's dad had mentioned him maybe twice in passing, always with a weird tone, like there was bad blood there. Nobody had seen or heard from Theodore in over 30 years. And this Theodore guy? He'd left his entire estate to Marcus. $47 million. I remember the night Marcus found out. He came home from work, pale as a ghost, just standing in our doorway with his phone in his hand. I was on the couch eating leftover pizza and watching some Netflix show, and I looked up at him like, "Dude, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." He just stared at me for a solid 10 seconds before he said, "I just inherited $47 million. I laughed. I actually laughed because I thought he was joking. "Yeah, and I just won the lottery," I said, turning back to the TV. "I'm serious, Jamie. I'm dead serious." The tone of his voice made me look back at him, and I could see he wasn't kidding. We spent the next 4 hours going through the letter from the lawyer, the documentation, everything. It was real. All of it was real. Some great uncle Marcus had never even met had left him a fortune. At first, we were both excited. I mean, my best friend just became a multimillionaire. We celebrated, popped some cheap champagne, talked about all the crazy things he could do. I wasn't jealous, honestly, I wasn't. I was genuinely happy for him. Marcus had always been a good guy, always been there for me, and if anyone deserved some good luck, it was him. But things started changing within weeks. First, Marcus quit his job. That made sense, why keep working when you've got that much money? Then he moved out of our apartment. Also made sense, he could afford something way better. He bought a ridiculous penthouse downtown, one of those places with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. I helped him move, and I remember standing in his new living room, which was bigger than our entire old apartment, thinking, good for him, man. Good for him. But then the phone calls started getting less frequent. When we did hang out, he seemed distracted, always on his phone, always talking about investments and financial advisors and meetings. He started dressing different, expensive suits, designer watches, the whole thing. He got a new car, a Tesla, then traded that in for a Porsche a few months later. I tried to be cool about it. I really did. I told myself he was just adjusting to his new life, that we'd find our rhythm again. But it kept getting worse. He started hanging out with a completely different crowd, people I'd never met, rich people, people who talked about their vacation homes and their portfolios and their private club memberships. When I'd try to make plans, he'd often cancel last minute or just be too busy. The few times we did hang out, it felt forced, like he was doing me a favor. About 6 months after he inherited the money, we had what I thought was going to be a normal guy's night. He invited me to this insanely expensive steakhouse downtown, the kind of place where they don't have prices on the menu. I felt uncomfortable the whole time, but I tried to just enjoy it. Marcus ordered a bottle of wine that cost more than my monthly car payment. Halfway through dinner, Marcus started talking about this investment opportunity. Some tech startup that his new friends were getting into. He said he was putting in 2 million and asked if I wanted in. Mark, you know I don't have that kind of money, I said, trying to laugh it off. Oh, right, yeah, he said, like he'd genuinely forgotten that I wasn't also a millionaire. Well, even like 50,000 would be a solid entry point. 50,000. He said it like it was nothing. Like I could just pull that out of my back pocket. Man, I don't have 50,000 lying around, I said, feeling my face get hot. That's almost my entire savings. He looked at me with this expression I'd never seen before, like pity mixed with slight annoyance. Right. Sorry. I forget sometimes that. He trailed off, but I knew what he meant. He forgot that I was still a regular person with a regular job and regular money problems. That dinner was the beginning of the end of our friendship, though I didn't know it at the time. Over the next year, I saw Marcus maybe once every 2 months, if that. Always in these uncomfortable settings, expensive restaurants, his penthouse for some party where I didn't know anyone, a box seat at a Pirates game where his new friends mostly ignored me. I felt like a charity case, like he was keeping me around out of obligation rather than genuine friendship. But I still considered him my best friend. I still thought underneath all the money and the new lifestyle, he was still the same Marcus I'd known since we were 7 years old. Then, about 3 months ago, everything fell apart in a way I never could have predicted. I was at a coffee shop in Lawrenceville, working on my laptop on a Saturday morning, when an older woman approached my table. She was probably in her 70s, well-dressed, with kind eyes but a nervous energy about her. "Excuse me," she said. "Are you Jamie Patterson?" I was immediately on guard. I'd never seen this woman before in my life. Yeah. Can I help you?" "My name is Ruth Hammond," she said. "I'm Theodore Hammond's daughter. I believe your friend Marcus inherited my father's estate." My stomach dropped. "Oh. Yeah. Marcus was his great-nephew." "Can I sit down?" she asked. "I've been trying to reach Marcus for months, but he won't return my calls or emails. His lawyers basically told me to stop contacting him. But I really need to talk to someone about my father's estate. About what really happened." I should have said no. I should have told her to leave me alone, that this was between her and Marcus. But something in her face, something desperate and sad, made me nod toward the empty chair. She sat down and pulled out a folder from her bag. "I'm going to tell you something that Marcus probably doesn't know. Something his lawyers definitely didn't tell him." For the next hour, Ruth Hammond told me a story that made my blood run cold. Theodore Hammond had been a real estate developer in Philadelphia from the 1960s through the 1990s. On paper, he was a successful businessman who'd made smart investments in commercial properties. But the truth was much darker. Ruth, who had been estranged from her father for the last 30 years of his life, had spent years researching her father's business dealings after his death. Theodore had made his fortune by systematically buying up properties in predominantly black neighborhoods in Philadelphia during the 60s and 70s, then using various illegal tactics to force tenants out, cutting off utilities, hiring thugs to intimidate families, filing false eviction notices, refusing to make necessary repairs until buildings became uninhabitable. Once the buildings were empty, he'd either demolish them and sell the land to developers, or convert them into high-end properties, making millions in the process. Dozens of families had been displaced, many losing everything they had. There were lawsuits, Ruth explained, her hands shaking as she showed me old newspaper clippings. So many lawsuits. Most were settled out of court with NDAs attached. But the families he destroyed, they never got real justice. My father was a monster, and he died wealthy and comfortable while the people he victimized struggled for decades. I stared at the documents in front of me, court records, newspaper articles from the Philadelphia Tribune, testimonies from families who'd been forced out of their homes. My head was spinning. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Ruth looked at me with tears in her eyes. "Because Marcus is living off blood money. That entire fortune was built on the suffering of innocent families. and I've been trying to convince him to do the right thing, to use that money to make amends, to set up a fund for the victims and their descendants, to at least acknowledge what my father did. But he won't even talk to me. Maybe he doesn't know, I said weakly. Maybe his lawyers didn't tell him. His lawyers absolutely know, Ruth said. I sent them a full dossier on my father's business practices. They acknowledged receiving it. But there's nothing illegal about inheriting the money. The statute of limitations has long passed on most of my father's crimes. So legally, Marcus is entitled to everything. But morally, she trailed off. I drove home in a daze. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Marcus, about all the expensive dinners and the penthouse and the Porsche. All of it built on the suffering of families who'd been terrorized out of their homes 50 years ago. The next day, I called Marcus. For the first time in months, he actually picked up. Hey man, what's up, he said, sounding distracted. We need to talk, I said. In person. It's important. He sighed. I'm actually really busy this week. Can it wait? No, Marcus. It can't wait. It's about your inheritance. About Theodore Hammond. There was a long pause. What about it? I know how he made his money. I know what he did. Another pause, longer this time. Where did you hear that? His daughter found me. Ruth Hammond. She told me everything. Marcus laughed, but it sounded forced. That woman is delusional. She's been harassing me for months. My lawyers told me to ignore her. Mark, I saw the documents. The court records. The newspaper articles. It's all real. Your great-uncle was a slumlord who destroyed families. That money you inherited, it came from some really dark places. That's not my problem, Marcus said, his voice turning cold. I didn't do anything wrong. I inherited money from a relative. Whatever he did, that was his choice, not mine. But you could do something about it now, I pressed. You could make amends. Set up a foundation, track down the families who were hurt, do something good with that money. Why would I do that? Marcus snapped. It's my money. I didn't earn it by doing anything wrong. Some old guy I never met did some shady business deals half a century ago, that has nothing to do with me. Mark, come on. This isn't you talking. This is what, Jamie? This is me being realistic? This is me not giving away millions of dollars because of something I had no part in? You're just jealous. You've been jealous since day one. That's not fair, I said, feeling anger rising in my chest. I've been happy for you. I've supported you. But this is different. This is about doing the right thing. The right thing, Marcus repeated mockingly. You know what I think? I think you're bitter that you're still living in a shitty apartment and working your shitty job while I'm actually living life. This isn't about morality for you, this is about bringing me down because you can't stand seeing me succeed. Fuck you, Marcus, I said, my voice shaking. I've been your best friend for 20 years. I've had your back through everything. And now you're going to accuse me of jealousy because I'm asking you to consider that the money you're spending came from destroying people's lives? I don't need this, Marcus said. I don't need you or anyone else telling me what to do with my money. Don't call me again. He hung up. I sat there, staring at my phone, feeling like I'd just been punched in the gut. This wasn't Marcus. This couldn't be the same person I'd grown up with. But it was. The money hadn't changed him, it had revealed who he really was when he had the option to be selfish. For weeks after that, I tried to move on. I threw myself into work, spent more time with other friends, tried to forget about Marcus and the whole situation. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to do something. That's when I made a decision that I'm still not sure was right or wrong. I contacted Ruth Hammond and told her I wanted to help. Together, we started researching Theodore Hammond's victims, the families he'd displaced, the ones who'd been part of the lawsuits, the ones who'd settled and signed NDAs. We tracked down as many people as we could, descendants of the original families, people who'd been children when they were forced out of their homes, now elderly themselves. We compiled everything into a comprehensive report. And then, with Ruth's help, I went to the press. The story broke in the Philadelphia Inquirer first, then got picked up nationally. Tech worker living large on grandfather's blood money refuses to make amends. The headline was sensationalist, but the article was well researched and fair. It laid out Theodore Hammond's history, the families he'd hurt, Marcus's inheritance, and his refusal to even acknowledge the dark origins of his wealth. Marcus's life imploded almost overnight. His new rich friends dropped him immediately. Nobody wants to be associated with that kind of PR nightmare. The tech startup he'd invested in asked him to divest because they didn't want the bad publicity. He started getting hate mail and threats. People protested outside his building. His social media became a wasteland of angry comments. A week after the story broke, Marcus called me. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "You destroyed my life," he said. His voice sounded hollow, broken. "I've lost everything. People hate me. I can't go anywhere without being harassed. I had to hire security. My own mother called me crying because people have been bothering her at work. And it's all your fault. You could have prevented this," I said quietly. "Ruth Hammond came to you first. She asked you to do the right thing. All you had to do was acknowledge what happened and make some kind of amends. So you decided to destroy me instead? Some best friend you are. I'm not the one who destroyed you, Marcus. You did that yourself." There was a long silence. Then Marcus said something that made my blood run cold. "You think you're some kind of hero? You think exposing me makes you a good person? You're not. You're just as bad as me. You didn't do this for those families. You did it because you were angry at me. You did it for revenge. So don't act like you're some crusader for justice. You're just a petty, bitter person who couldn't handle seeing someone else succeed." He hung up before I could respond. I wish I could say he was wrong, but that night, lying in bed, I had to ask myself, why did I really go to the press? Was it because I genuinely wanted to help the families Theodore Hammond had hurt? Or was it because I was angry at Marcus for how he'd treated me, for how he'd changed, for choosing money over our friendship? I still don't know the answer. Maybe it was both. Maybe you can do the right thing for the wrong reasons. Or maybe Marcus was right, and I'm just as bad as him. The aftermath has been complicated. Ruth Hammond and I did set up a foundation using some of the money she inherited from her father. She got a much smaller portion before he changed his will to favor Marcus. We've been working to track down the families affected and provide them with some compensation, though it's difficult because so much time has passed and many of the original victims have died. We've managed to help about 20 families so far, but there are dozens more we're still trying to find. Marcus, meanwhile, still has most of his money. Legally, there's nothing that can force him to give it up. But his life is dramatically different. He moved out of Pittsburgh entirely, supposedly to somewhere on the West Coast. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he's living much more quietly now, keeping a low profile. His social media is gone. He's essentially in hiding. We haven't spoken since that last phone call 3 months ago. I doubt we ever will again. Sometimes I drive past our old apartment in Shadyside, the one we shared before any of this happened, and I think about how simple life was back then. 2 best friends splitting rent, eating cheap food, watching football games, complaining about work, planning futures that seemed aligned. I miss that Marcus. I mourn him like he died, because in a way, he did. The person I grew up with doesn't exist anymore. But then I think about the families who lost their homes, who were terrorized and displaced and never got justice. I think about the elderly people Ruth and I have talked to, who still remember being forced out of their houses as children, who never fully recovered from that trauma. And I think maybe losing my best friend was worth it if we could help them in some small way. Or maybe I'm just telling myself that to feel better about what I did. A few weeks ago, I got a letter in the mail. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was from Marcus. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 3 sentences. "You were right about the money. You were wrong about how you handled it. I hope you can live with your choices, because I have to live with mine." Enclosed was a check for $5 million, made out to the Ruth Hammond Foundation for Displaced Families. I stared at that check for hours, trying to figure out what it meant. Was it an apology? An acknowledgement of guilt? A final fuck you, proving that he could have done something all along but chose not to until I forced his hand? Was it genuine remorse, or just an attempt to rebuild his reputation? I'll never know, because I can't bring myself to call him and ask. Part of me wants to. Part of me wants to pick up the phone and try to salvage something of our friendship, to see if there's any piece of the old Marcus left underneath everything that's happened. But the other part of me knows that bridge is burned beyond repair, that too much has happened, that we've both said and done things we can't take back. So I deposited the check. The foundation will put it to good use. We're planning to track down more families, provide educational scholarships for descendants of the displaced, and create a memorial documenting Theodore Hammond's victims and the broader history of housing discrimination in Philadelphia. It's good work. Important work. Work that might not have happened if I hadn't done what I did. But I still lie awake at night sometimes, wondering if I did the right thing. Wondering if there was a better way to handle it. Wondering if I could have helped those families without destroying my oldest friendship in the process. Wondering if Marcus was right about my motivations, if I was driven more by anger and hurt than by justice. I guess I'll never really know. And I guess that's something I'm going to have to live with for the rest of my life. But here's what I do know. Money changes people, but not always in the way you'd think. Sometimes it doesn't change them at all, it just reveals who they were all along, strips away the constraints that kept their worst impulses in check. And sometimes, in fighting against someone else's moral failings, you have to confront your own. Marcus inherited $47 million. In the process, he lost his integrity, his friends, his reputation, and his peace of mind. I helped expose him and helped some of the families his great-uncle hurt. In the process, I lost my best friend and any certainty I had about my own motivations. Neither of us won. The money saw to that. I still have the voicemail from that night when he first told me about the inheritance, when we were both still naive about what that money would do to us. Sometimes I listen to it late at night, his voice full of shock and excitement, mine in the background laughing in disbelief, both of us imagining a future that would never come. Dude, his voice says on the recording, crackling with static and joy, our lives are about to change forever. He was right about that. He just had no idea how much, or how badly. I've thought about reaching out so many times. I've drafted texts I never sent, emails I never finished, letters I never mailed. But what would I even say? Sorry for exposing you, but also not really. I miss you, but I'd do it all again. I wish we could go back, but we can't. None of it feels adequate. The truth is, there's no neat resolution to the story. No moral that ties everything together. No moment of catharsis where Marcus and I reconcile and everyone lives happily ever after. Real life isn't like that. Sometimes you make choices that hurt people you love, even when you're trying to help people they've hurt. Sometimes the right thing and the wrong thing get so tangled up together that you can't tell them apart anymore. I helped some families get a measure of justice and compensation they deserved. That's real. That matters. The scholarship fund we're setting up will help kids go to college, kids whose grandparents were displaced by Theodore Hammond's greed. That's good. That's important. But I also destroyed my best friend's life, at least partially out of anger and hurt. That's also real. That also matters. Both things are true. I have to live with both. Last week, I ran into Marcus's mom at the grocery store. We'd always been close, she was like a second mother to me growing up. She looked at me for a long moment, and I couldn't read her expression. Then she pulled me into a hug. Thank you, she whispered in my ear. I know what you did. I know why you did it. And I know Marcus is angry at you. But you gave him a chance to be a good person, and he refused it. What happened after that, that's on him, not you. She pulled back and looked at me with tears in her eyes. I raised him better than that. I raised him to care about people, to do the right thing even when it's hard. The money didn't change him. It just showed me that somewhere along the way, I failed. That's not true, I said, feeling my own tears coming. You didn't fail. You're an amazing mother. Marcus he made choices. We all did. She nodded, squeezed my hand, and walked away. I stood there in the cereal aisle for 10 minutes afterward, crying quietly, hoping nobody would notice. That conversation has stuck with me. Because maybe that's the real tragedy here. Not that Marcus became corrupted by money. Not that I betrayed my best friend. But that both of us, in our own ways, became people we didn't recognize. We both failed the test that inheritance presented to us. Marcus failed by choosing wealth over integrity. I failed by choosing revenge disguised as righteousness. Or maybe I'm being too hard on myself. Maybe I did the best I could in an impossible situation. Maybe sometimes there are no good choices, only less bad ones. I don't know. I really don't know. What I do know is this: if I could go back to that night when Marcus first told me about the inheritance, knowing everything that would happen afterward, I'm not sure I'd change anything. Because those families are getting help. Because there's a memorial being built that will tell the truth about what Theodore Hammond did. Because maybe, somewhere, Marcus is becoming a better person, or at least a more self-aware one. Or maybe I'd change everything. Maybe I'd have handled it completely differently. Maybe I'd have found a way to help those families without destroying my friendship. Maybe such a way existed, and I just wasn't smart enough or patient enough to find it. I'll never know. But I do know that $47 million cost Marcus and me something that money can't buy back: the belief that we knew who we were, and the certainty that we'd always have each other's backs no matter what. That's worth more than any inheritance. And we both lost it? So that's my story. That's what happens when your best friend inherits a fortune built on suffering and refuses to acknowledge it. That's what happens when you try to force someone to do the right thing. That's what happens when money stops being abstract and becomes real, real enough to ruin lives, both the lives of those who have it and those who don't. I don't know if I'm the hero or the villain of this story. Probably neither. Probably just another person who made choices that hurt people, even while trying to help others. Just another person navigating the complicated mess of friendship and money and morality and finding out I'm not as good as I thought I was. Ruth Hammond told me once, after the story broke and everything fell apart, doing the right thing doesn't mean it's the easy thing. And it doesn't mean everyone will thank you for it. Sometimes it just means you can sleep at night knowing you tried. Most nights, I can sleep. Some nights, I can't. And I guess that's as close to peace as I'm going to get.